Jiang Xiaowen didn't understand what was going on. Where was he? All he remembers is being sucked into a cosmic vortex. Is it possible that? Is he going to another dimension? Jiang Xiaowen opened his eyes. He was immersed in a vortex of incomprehensible energy. He was moving to another dimension. It looks like it's true. As they say, pass once and wealth and fame will follow you. No matter how useless he was, I decided that he would still become a martial artist. And he will have a group of beautiful girls. The thought of the possibility of such a future amused Jiang Xiaowen. Moving to another dimension, he laughed. How could Jiang Xiaowen, an orphan from the 20th century, expect such a good thing to happen to him? He fell from the sky, right on the roof of some wooden shed and broke it. With a crash, Xiaowen landed right on the dusty floor. Residents were shocked, because they had just witnessed a man fall from the sky to the ground. Xiaowen stood up, looked around and shouted to be taken away from this place. It seemed to him that he looked terrible, like a man who was destined to die here. He sat down, clutching a log and sobbed, because beautiful girls need a lot of money, and he doesn't have it. Then Xiaowen suddenly thought that since he could not change anything in this situation, then at least he should just sit and enjoy what happened to him. He thought it was a long night, so he'd better look around. But he was so tired that he wasn't able to do anything at the moment. Therefore, he thought to leave the inspection of the area until tomorrow. But for now he just went to bed. Morning came. Jiang Xiaowen opened his eyes when he heard the noise of the crowd coming from the street. He got up and went outside. He wondered what had happened and why people had made such a fuss since the morning. Suddenly he looked up at the sky and saw two people flying. He couldn't believe that there were cultivators in this dimension. He looked at the girl who was flying first and noted that she was young and very beautiful. He remembered reading about immortal cultivators in novels in his past life, but he never expected to see them in real life. Xiaowen watched and admired the beauty of the cultivators. He even thought that he had not come to this world for nothing after all. He saw that they were flying with swords and thought it was very cool. He couldn't take his eyes off them and stared at every little thing. The cultivator guy seemed a little harsh at first glance, but when he smiled, it seemed that this is not the case at all. He thanked all the villagers for their love and said that they were here to recruit students to their school, but these students must be talented. The girls who were standing near Xiaowen looked at the guy in the sky, admiring, and shouted loudly about how handsome this guy was. Xiaowen looked at him with disbelief and frowned. The cultivator made a ladder and announced that those who can climb more than 3 steps up the stone stairs will be able to get into their school and start practicing. There was one brave guy in the crowd who decided that he could do it. He entered the first step and everything was fine. He thought that perhaps it was even quite easy. But suddenly his body stopped obeying him, and he could not go on. He just fell on his back and couldn't get up. The crowd was at a loss. They discussed that it couldn't be that the guy looked pretty strong. Xiaowen was standing at this time and leaning his hand on his chin, thinking, what's wrong with these ordinary 9 stone steps? Why does it seem so difficult? How to climb the mountain of swords and cross the sea of fire? Suddenly, another guy decided to try his hand. It was the village headman's son, and Xiaowen was wondering if he could do it. If he tries. All the villagers were delighted with the son of the head. He walked, radiating the aura of a winner. The residents thought that he would definitely be able to. They shouted out some words and expressions about how amazing it was. And he could. He reached the 7th step and stopped at the 6th and realized that this was his limit. Cultivators did not expect this. They could not have imagined that there was such a talented person in this small backwater village, because the ability to rise to the 6th step is already considered excellent. The cultivator said that the guy's talent is excellent and asked him to follow them to the Jiang sect later. The son of the village head thanked the cultivators and bowed. The cultivator asked if there were still those who wanted to test their strength. There was also another guy who was able to get up. All the villagers enthusiastically clapped for him. Then everyone started to disperse, because they thought that they would not succeed anyway. Cultivators announced, which is because there are no more takers. Then the school enrollment is over on this. But unexpectedly, Xiaowen's voice rang out from the crowd, who expressed a desire to try to climb the stairs. The cultivator, who was about to leave, heard the voice and turned to face the crowd. All the residents started laughing that some beggar, apparently not knowing his place, wanted to join the Jiang sect. Jiang Xiaowen believed that he would succeed. He wanted to, so that everyone looks at him at this moment. He walked up to the stairs, took a step. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Would he be able to climb this ladder or not? He walked a couple of steps and thought that it wasn't as difficult as it seemed from the outside. With a smile on his face, he wanted to go further, but suddenly fell on his back. The guy standing next to him looked at him with contempt. I wonder if such garbage as he also wants to cultivate. Everyone started shouting and mocking. Xiaowen felt uneasy. He was upset that he wouldn't be able to join the cultivator school. Xiaowen told someone to get out of the way and went ahead. But someone from the crowd tripped him, and he fell face down on the ground. He heard people in the crowd saying that he was worthless. That garbage was always garbage, calling him a stinking beggar who was trying to show off and saying that he deserved it all. The crowd looked right at him and burst out laughing. The girl soaring in the sky on a sword told the companion that there was nothing more worth it here and they could leave. He looked at the girl with love and agreed. At this time, Zi often decided that he just needed to somehow attract the attention of cultivators. He was angry that he had to go through such humiliation. Then he turned to the immortal Chan, asking him to listen to his request. He said that he had a limited and rare collection of knowledge of ancient sages and he would like to present it to the immortal Chan, and hoped that Chan would kindly accept it and recognize Jiang Xiaowen. Immortal Chan turned around and seeing the rare collection came into a state of shock. He thought about it and remembering that the clan had recently lost the mountain guards, he invited Xiaowen to go with them. Of course Xiaowen agreed to this proposal. He was so glad that the smile did not leave his face for a long time. Xiaowen immediately knew that Immortal Chang would agree, because he wanted to get the book. They all went to Xiang together. Jiang Xiaowen said goodbye to the stupid hillbillies, saying that he was going to the sect of practitioners. Xiaowen looked carefully around the entire flight. Suddenly the son of the village head asked him what such a dirty beggar had forgotten here. Immortal Chang explained that Jiang Xiaowen had become their brother's disciple specifically in order to get into the Xiang clan. Xiaowen thought that the son of the village head didn't even realize how cool he, Jiang Xiaowen, was, although he was very sad about his collection. Then he began to get a little seasick from the flight, and he covered his mouth with his hands. Immortal Chang told his sister to move on, while he decided to take Xiaowen to rest for a while so that they could continue their journey a little later. They landed on the green grass. Xiaowen walked towards the Wu River, and Immortal Chang slowly walked behind and told Jiang Xiaowen that he was very smart. But sometimes being overly smart is just a curse, like, for example, now. There are things you should know and things you are not allowed to know. Immortal Chang was getting closer to Xiaowen, who was not feeling very well. He continued his speech, saying that if it became known in the future that Immortal Chan was reading such books, his image would be destroyed. He can't let Xiaowen live. Slowly approaching from behind, Immortal Chang suddenly pushed Xiaowen into the water and said that he was to blame for everything. He stood and watched with a smile on his face as Jiang Xiaowen fell into the water and went to the bottom. Jiang Xiaowen woke up in some unfamiliar forest. Damn that handsome man. To go so far in order to achieve your goal, to give up your virtue. Xiaowen thought that when I came back, I would kill him. He looked around the unfamiliar area and saw a huge flowering tree. A lone monk was sitting under a tree. Xiaowen looked at him and realized that he was not clear where. The monk was not young, he was an elderly man. Jiang Xiaowen thought that this place was very strange and he should get out of here as soon as possible. He slowly started to leave so as not to disturb the old man under the tree. The monk approached the young guy and said that he was an old monk. He has been sitting here for 180,000 years, waiting for the right person to pass on the Buddhist scripture. Xiaowen replied that he was still too young to become a monk. But the old man said that the Buddha once said that heaven and earth are the same, the great universe is the progenitor of all things in the world. Xiaowen thought that this monk was not as simple as it seemed at first glance. He was different from the monks he had met before. The monk said he had a copy of the exclusive secret book and showed it to Jiang Xiaowen. Xiaowen didn't particularly like the book that the monk showed and decided that it would be better if he left, because this old man is too strange. The old man apologized, saying that it was his mistake and he just, by pure chance, got the wrong book. Xiaowen wanted to run away, but the old man grabbed his hand, explaining that it was just a small misunderstanding. Xiaowen suddenly felt something inexplicably strange. Some kind of energy enveloped his entire body. He looked at the old man and thought that some kind of magic was happening to him. Jiang Xiaowen thought that all this was just an illusion, because the old man looks older. Suddenly, he felt a strange feeling in the abdominal area. The way of heaven. A difficult journey filled with betrayal. The age of prosperity is about to begin, and the heavenly law will be restored. I long to become righteous in the infinite world. Leave your body and go to the imperial palace. Xiaowen heard the old monk's life story being told. The monk went on to say that it is necessary to discard the status of a monk and comprehend the true path as a gift. He will be able to follow the world of thousands of people to find out his strength and weaken evil spirits. He must find a skillful method, gain a sense of righteousness. Heaven and man will return and finally be reborn. The old man didn't have time to finish. He was surrounded by bright flames. The flame was so bright that Xiaowen couldn't look at it. He covered his eyes with his hand. When he opened his eyes, the monk was gone. Only a small burnt piece of land remained. Xiaowen had the honor to see the fate of the master monk, and he, of course, will remember his path and continue his work. Xiaowen fell to his knees and, bowing, shouted to the teacher that his disciple was paying his respects. Jiang Xiaowen got up, looked around. There was not a soul in the area. He began to think about what kind of treasure the master had told him about. He picked up a stone from the ground and tossed it, then caught it with his hand and suddenly noticed something incredible. When he squeezed the stone crumbled in his hand like sand. He thought that with such incredible strength he could achieve a lot in his life. He thought that he needed to try to reveal the depth of this power. He went and sat under a tree, just like the old monk had done before. He closed his eyes and sat lost in his thoughts and feelings. He saw some fragment near him, but I didn't understand what it was. Then the fragment disappeared. Jiang Xiaowen sat breathing in the fresh air. He opened his eyes and saw some unfamiliar plants in front of him. He hadn't eaten anything all day and was very hungry right now. But to succumb to his hunger and eat grass would be too much, even for him. But still, he was probably too hungry. Even the grass seemed delicious to him at that moment, and he began to greedily grab the grass and put it in his mouth. He even put some grass in his pocket to eat the next time he's hungry, because the grass seemed to taste pretty good to him. He was surprised at how full of energy his body was right now. He took a step, jumped, and suddenly found himself in the air. He didn't understand what was going on at all and how it happened. Zi often fell and rolled straight to the river with requests for help. 2 days later, Jiang Xiaowen was already used to it and thought that maybe he should leave this place already. It was sunset. Xiaowen was floating in the air. At this time, a young girl was walking on the ground, but she was stopped by 2 guys completely unfamiliar to her. They were wondering if she wanted to have a drink with them and where in general she was in such a hurry. The girl asked them to leave her alone, because she absolutely does not want to drink with strangers. Jiang Xiaowen came down from the mountain and saw this scene. He thought that he had just come down from the mountain and could already become a hero for such a beauty. Well, at least he can use these guys as his punching bag. The guys told the girl that they would not offend her and offered to agree to their proposal after all. One guy put his hand on the girl's shoulder. Then she said, "They say, okay, so be it," and grabbing the guy by the hand, she turned him around with a sharp movement and grabbed him by the neck. The guy was scared, and the girl asked if he was all right. Then she threw him away, hit him, and then the second guy too. They were both lying on the ground and moaning in great pain. The girl turned around and went on about her business. Jiang Xiaowen was a little shocked by such a scene and thought that he was clearly no longer needed here and it was time for him to leave. He turned around and wanted to leave, but it was too late. The girl had already noticed him. She looked questioningly in the direction of the guy. She abruptly approached him, grabbed his clothes and asked if he was in league with those guys that she had just crippled. Jiang Xiaowen was scared to death by the sudden appearance of the girl behind him. He turned around abruptly and with tears in his eyes began to assure the girl that he had nothing to do with it at all. He was not guilty and was just passing by. The girl turned around and said that she could assume that he was not one of them. Xiaowen felt relieved and thanked the young girl for not beating him. He looked at her and could not look away. She seemed so beautiful to him. The girl said goodbye, saying that she needed to hurry to Huang Tianmen very urgently. Xiaowen shouted to the departing girl that it just so happened that he also needed to go there. He invited her to go together, but he didn't hear an answer. He took out a plant from his pocket, which he was going to eat, and then a girl suddenly ran up to him. She began to admire and shout, asking where Jiang Xiaowen got this immortal spiritual root from. Xiaowen didn't understand which root. Is she talking about the grass? He stood and held a root in his hand. The girl was indignant. It's not some ordinary herb at all. It's a medicinal plant, incredibly rare and priceless. This root contains a lot of spiritual kai, and if you are lucky enough to get at least one of them, then your spirit will become very strong. Xiaowen replied that it did not matter to him how much this herb cost. He handed the root to the girl and said that she could take all these 3 stalks. She gratefully rushed to hug the guy. He was happy with this development of events. He remembered that he had recently eaten 7 of these stalks himself, so it was no wonder that he had become so strong. Jiang Xiaowen and his new friend headed to Huan Tianmen. "Why are there so many people here? Isn't that too much?" Jiang Xiaowen asked when they finally reached their destination. The girl replied that there was nothing unusual in this. Huang Tianmen's fame is unimaginable, so it is quite reasonable that everyone in the world wants to be disciples in their clan. The exam rules in the Huang Tianmen clan were exactly the same as in the Xiang clan. You had to pass 3 steps on a stone staircase. Xiaowen wondered if it was the same rule again. He and the girl stood and looked at the cultivators floating in the air. There were many attempts to climb the stairs, but there were still no successful ones. Then Yuanzu, the girl who came here to Huang Tianmen with Xiaowen, decided that since she had already come, she should definitely try. She went to the stairs and took the first step, then the second, third, fourth. She walked and thought about how amazing she was. And now there are only 9 steps left to the end of the stairs. The crowd was delighted. They shouted that they did not expect from such a young girl that she would be so strong. No one could believe that at such a young age one could have so much power. Xiaowen didn't expect this either. He thought that Yuanzu was not only very good-natured, but also insanely strong. He thought that if he failed again, he would be very embarrassed. But no matter what, he wanted to try again. He should try not to be a weakling. Jiang Xiaowen walked up to the stairs. He took a step, a second, a third, and now he has already passed this seemingly endless staircase. Xiaowen passed this exam. He was surprised that he could pass the stairs so easily. The crowd was shocked. Everyone was delighted and jubilant. Xiaowen stood on the stairs and rejoiced at his victory. Yuanzu came up to him and said that he did well, because he coped with the task. Jiang Xiaowen replied that it wasn't difficult enough. The girl clapped her hands with a smile on her face. Xiaowen turned away and wiped his sweaty face with a napkin. He was very glad that he didn't embarrass himself in front of Zhu. An old man stood on the Dao rock and told other people that in order to achieve immortality, your body must be one with the Tao. Then you will be able to influence the sky. the earth and use your willpower to control objects. If you reach the top, you will be able to soar in the sky, move mountains and seas. The cultivator level can be divided into 5 realms: minor, consciousness, saint, emperor, and immortal. Each sphere has 9 levels, also known as the 9 heavens. Yuanzu and Zai often stood and listened attentively to every word of the old man with great delight in their eyes. The old man went on to say that the green jade scroll contained the jade purity method, the main method of this clan. The blue jade scroll contains pills so that you don't feel hungry. He told the disciples that they would have to meditate here for 3 months. Jiang Xiaowen often sat and meditated, thinking that he needed to tell Yuanzu about his achievements, and that in addition to the purity of jade, he would practice the Buddhist sutra in secret. He was sitting with his eyes closed, completely immersed in his thoughts. After 3 months, Jiang Xiaowen could already lift huge stones by force. Yuanzu was delighted with this. She stood behind and watched him do it and smiled sweetly. Suddenly someone shouted that the elders were already here and everything stopped. Xiaowen and Zhu stood and looked at the elders. There were other students standing in front of them, and one told the other that he thought he would be able to settle in one of the 7 main peaks after 3 months of training, and did not expect that there would be another month of trials. Another replied that they have been training for a very long time, but it is still very difficult for them to become inner disciples. Xiaowen thought that all this was much worse even than the college entrance exam. But Yuanzu was full of energy and just glowed with joy. She suggested to a friend to find a good place to practice together. Grabbing Xiaowen's hand, the girl dragged him along. They went to different places. In one of these places, Zhu said that it was very beautiful here and offered to stay in this place. Xiaowen agreed that the place was really very beautiful. A girl and a guy came up to them. The girl asked her brother if it wasn't better for them to just retreat. She saw that Xiaowen and Zhu liked this place. She thought they wouldn't agree. The guy standing next to him said that Zhu Yue is an inner disciple of the Heavenly Emperor clan, so Xiaowen should not worry about this, because there are not many people in the clan who would dare to go against the Zhu family. Zhu Yue looked at Xiaowen and Yuanzu with a stern look and said that he was Zhu Yue, the cousin of Zhu Sidao, one of the main disciples of the Heavenly Emperor clan. He asked if Xiaowen could let his sister take the place. Xiaowen looked straight into Yue's eyes and apologized, saying that they also really like it here, so, alas, they will not be able to leave this meta. He thought only that this guy would finally take his sister and leave already. Zhu Yue looked at Jiang Xiaowen and said that he was a very persistent person and there was nothing he couldn't get. Xiaowen replied that he would be happy to see Yue get the job. Yue thought that Jiang Xiaowen was quite a reckless child. A crowd gathered around. People were discussing that everyone in the neighborhood is afraid of the Zhu brothers, and apparently Jiang Xiaowen is quite fearless. Well, or he just got tired of living. No one would dare to go against the Zhu brothers. Yue said he gave Jiang Xiaowen one chance and asked not to blame him for what might happen next. Suddenly, another guy appeared in front of Xiaowen. He said that Zhu Wei had no need to fight against such a pathetic little man and asked for permission to deal with Xiaowen himself. Jiang Xiaowen only laughed in response. He lifted a stone with one kick and this stone flew straight into his opponent. He flew a great distance away and fell, crouching in pain. Zhu Wei turned around and looked at the guy who was spitting blood out of his mouth. Yuanzu was standing behind, watching this scene from the side. Everyone in the crowd was indignant. Where did the guy get such strength from? Who is this guy? They even called him a monster. Zhu Wei shouted to the guy standing behind him that Jiang Xiaowen had insulted the members of the sect and needed to get rid of him. The guys surrounded Xiaowen from all sides. One tried to attack, but the attempt was unsuccessful. He was hit right in the face so that he flew off to the side and also hit his head on a tree. They decided it would be more effective if they attacked Xiaowen altogether. 3 4th-level masters attacked Xiaowen at the same time. Everyone thought that he was definitely in trouble, but he threw all 3 guys in different directions at once. The crowd was in huge shock. Zhu approached Xiaowen and said that although he had beaten them badly, they deserved it. Zhu Yue shouted angrily that he would give him one last chance. He told Xiaowen to kneel in front of him, bow down and beg for mercy, break his arms and leave the Heavenly Emperor clan. Jiang Xiaowen looked at his opponent with a grin. Who is he that Xiaowen should kneel in front of him and apologize? Does he seriously think he deserves it? Xiaowen screamed and kicked a huge rock right at Yue. But the stone did not reach its goal. It shattered into many small stones. A pile of stone dust rose. Yue stood unharmed, holding a sword in his hand. Jiang Xiaowen did not understand how this happened and asked Yuanzu about it. She told Xiaowen that this sword was nothing but a spiritual weapon. She explained that the magic weapons of the Huan continent are divided into several levels: mortal, spiritual, precious, supreme, and most valuable treasure. Legendary immortal weapons. Spiritual weapons greatly increase the power of a cultivator. Very few within the realm of consciousness could wield weapons of this rank. Yue held the sword with the force in the air and said that he had already given Jiang Xiaowen a chance to survive. Xiaowen was ready to attack. Zhu asked him to be as careful as possible, because magic weapons should not be taken lightly. Jiang Xiaowen took a deep breath of air. He was setting himself up for battle, and so he stands and waits to be attacked. The crowd is waiting. They look at Zi often and think he is quite agile. Yue Wei shouted that there was no difference, because he would die anyway, and with these words jumped up and prepared to strike his first blow with a spiritual weapon. Zi often stood and smiled, looking into Yue Wei's eyes. This scared Yue Wei a little and caused him questions. Zi often jumped back and the blow hit the ground, which was cut into several pieces. Yue Wei threw off his outer clothes and flew into the air with a sword, saying that he would look at how Zi often would cope with his next blow. He advised Zi often to be smarter in the next life and learn to distinguish who can be provoked and who is not worth it. And he rushed at Zi often. Yuanzu shouted for Zi often to run away rather, but he didn't even think about such a thing. He just stood there and didn't move. From the crowd came shouts about the power of spiritual weapons, that now the guy will definitely come to an end. But Zi often created a shield around himself and repelled his enemy's blow again. Yue Wei was horrified. He did not understand how such a thing could happen. His sword flew to the side and stuck into the ground. He thought, this can't be. And while he was distracted, Zi often struck him a powerful blow right in the stomach. Yue Wei flew to the tree near which his spiritual weapon was. There were voices in the crowd saying that this guy is incredibly strong, his speed and strength are incredible. He was able to defeat Zhu Yue with his bare hands. Yue Wei was on his knees and spitting out scarlet blood from his mouth. He announced that he would give his King Yin sword to the one who could defeat the man who had just humiliated him. Many people in the crowd were indignant. Someone wanted to try, but understood that nothing good would come of this idea. Someone just thought it was a stupid idea. Yue Wei said he would remember this day. And Zi often had better not run away. The next time he came for him and Yue Wei wanted to try to attack again, but the idea was clearly not the best. Zi often dodged and said he hated people like Yue Wei, slapped him hard in the face. Yue Wei fell and this time he lost consciousness. Zi often stood looking at the defeated opponent and wondered how this man even thought of threatening him. Turning to Zhu Yue's friends, Zi often told them to get Yue Wei out of here as soon as possible and get out, and he still needed to train with his girlfriend. The guys did so. The two of them took Yue Wei by the arms and finally told Zi often that when Yue Wei's older brother finished training, Jiang Xiaowen would be in big trouble and he would die the most terrible death. Meanwhile, the crowd began to disperse slowly. Zhu came up to Zi often and asked if he was all right. He replied that everything was fine. He was about to leave, but the girl grabbed his hand and asked what the word girlfriend meant. Jiang Xiaowen tried to explain that this word refers to the relationship between a guy and a girl who have a really close relationship. Yuanzu asked if that meant Zi often was her boyfriend now. She was a little embarrassed, and Zi often, who was also embarrassed, replied that he was her boyfriend, the only one. It's been a whole month. Zi often was sleeping on the grass under a tree and woke up when the sun was already shining in his eyes. He heard laughter, looked around and saw that it was Yuanzu giggling. She was sitting above him on the branch of the tree under which he had just been sleeping. He stood up and looked at her. She had poultry meat in her hands, and she offered Zi often to eat too. He asked her if she was cultivating, but he didn't get an answer. Zi often pondered and looked at Xiaozu. He thought Xiaozu was a very unusual girl. Suddenly they heard some strange noise coming from behind the mountains, and a huge bunch of birds flew out. They saw the elders approaching. The start of the tournament for the inner circle was announced. The inner circle contestants can challenge anyone inside each of the 7 circles. Only one winner will be accepted from each round. Yuanzu immediately flew away to receive instructions. Jiang Xiaowen was left sitting alone in the tree. The participants fought, thanked each other for the fight. The elders noticed that there are 6 guys who are much better even than the students at the last tournament. Apparently luck is clearly on the side of the elders today. It was really very surprising for them. The audience watched and admired the events taking place. They saw that so many talents with excellent skills appeared at the tournament that it was simply amazing. Zi often was sleeping peacefully on a tree, with a leaf in his mouth. He happened to overhear a conversation between 2 young men who were walking directly below him. One told the other how he had heard that this time the winner of the tournament would receive a spiritual weapon as a reward. Another recalled Jiang Xiaowen and asked if Xiaowen should not be afraid of Zhu Yue's revenge. They said Jiang Xiaowen was too bold to be afraid to offend Zhu Yue. Meanwhile, intense battles were still going on at the tournament. Jin Mohao, who is at the stage of the small sphere, the 7th stage, decided to challenge Jiang Xiaowen and shouted that Jiang Xiaowen should stop hiding in his shell like a turtle and should fight him like a man. Xiaowen immediately woke up. He replied that Mohao's words were too loud for a crook. People were surprised by Xiaowen's words. Is Jin Mohao really cheating? Xiaowen is so cocky. Mohao said that he habitually carries a spiritual weapon with him and stated that one hand would be enough for him to deal with someone who harmed Master Zhu and his juniors. He said that today he would ensure that justice finally prevailed. Xiaowen only laughed in response and asked, did they hear it? He said that he would defeat Xiaowen with one hand so that if he lost, he would have no excuses. Xiaowen was sitting on a tree and laughing, pointing at Mohao with his finger. He thanked Brother Jin for his mercy. With a jerk, he quickly jumped down from the tree and with a quick movement hit Mohao and headed straight for Jin Mohao. Jin Mohao didn't even have time to understand what had happened at all. He only saw a fist approaching his face. and then, fortunately for him, managed to put up a shield in front of him. Not only is Brother Jing merciful, but he doesn't even resist. Xiaofen didn't think that Brother Jing was so kind. Jiang Xiaowen stood and laughed at his rival, who had recently threatened him with violence. Mohao was very angry at Xiaofen's mocking behavior. He clenched his hand into a fist and swung to hit Xiaofen. But everything turned out to be completely different from how he imagined it. Jiang Xiaowen instantly caught his fist with his hand. Mohao wanted to hit with his other hand, but Xiaofen caught her with his hand just the same. Xiaofen taunted Mohao again, holding his hands and saying that they were very cute. At this time, Zhu was watching from the side and shouted to her boyfriend that he was very funny. She looked at them and laughed merrily. Jin Mohao screamed as he tried to break free from his enemy's tight grip, and Xiaofen let him go, but immediately struck him sharply. Mohao didn't have time to react and flew away after the impact. After a while, Jin Mohao was able to get to his feet. He took out a spiritual weapon and felt a new surge of energy. It was the same sword that Xiaofen had seen before, the King Yun sword. Xiaofen immediately recognized him and realized that all this simply could not be a coincidence. Mohao shouted at Xiaofen to die and with these words forcefully threw a spiritual sword at him, but Xiaofen immediately caught it with his hand. Mohao was very surprised at this turn of events and looked at his enemy with horror. Xiaofen held a sword in his hands and smiled exultantly. He asked if they were trying to scare him. Xiaofen walked towards his enemy with quick movements. He hit Mohao and then asked what happened to him. What happened to his mercy? Such impudence to retract your words. To think that he actually used a spiritual weapon. Xiaofen wanted to beat him to death. Mohao was very scared. He didn't understand how he could lose, despite the fact that he had a spiritual weapon. Xiaofen then punched his enemy in the face once more, but this time much harder. Everyone who watched this scene was shocked, because Jin Mohao is a master of the 7th stage, and he was defeated by the most ordinary student. Xiaofen stood and looked at the sword, and next to him, a defeated opponent was kneeling. Xiaofen asked if Mohao thought he was strong enough with this sword. He said that their abilities are exactly like heaven and earth. Even the most powerful weapons would not help Jin Mohao defeat him. The tournament is over. It was announced by the elders that the 7 inner disciples had finally been chosen. One of these 7 disciples was Jiang Xiaowen. He thought he was surprisingly lucky. Xiaofen heard someone calling him from behind. He turned around and saw Zhu Yunlin, who was asking Xiaofen who allowed him to take this spiritual weapon that he is currently holding on his shoulder. After the tournament, Jin Mohao immediately ran and told Yunlin that Xiaofen not only humiliated him, but also took away the King Yun sword that Yunlin had given him. He said Xiaofen doesn't take Yunlin seriously. Then Yunlin decided that he would act today. He went and found Xiaofen. When they finally met, Xiaofen approached Yunlin. He tapped him on the head and said with a smile on his face, "Kid, are you the same Loki that Zhu Wei found? Your milk is not dry on your lips. What kind of sword do you need?" Yunlin was angry at this attitude towards himself. He shouted, asking how Jiang Xiaofen could treat him so disrespectfully. He created a huge stream of powerful energy around himself and sent it straight to Xiaofen. Xiaofen thought that, unfortunately, this kid is a pretty good fighter. But Xiaofen was much stronger. He pointed the sword at the attacker and suddenly something happened that Xiaofen could not have expected. From Yunlin's powerful energy, King Yun's sword shattered into a bunch of small pieces. Xiaofen was in shock and didn't understand what was going on. Zhu had been watching from the side all this time. She realized that it was similar to Zhu Sidao's soul practice tower. The guy standing next to Yuan Zhu said that Zhu Sidao gave the soul practice tower to Zhu Yunlin because he was afraid that his younger brother might be bullied during his absence. Yunlin created the tower and said that it was his big brother's secret weapon and it would be a great honor for Xiaofen to die under this tower. Zhu supported her boyfriend and asked him to be careful. He thought that this tower was quite strong and it would be difficult for him with his strength of the 6th degree of the small sphere. Suddenly, huge fire dragons flew out of the tower. There were a lot of them. Xiaofen was even a little scared and slightly recoiled from the tower. He didn't know any techniques to deal with this dragon. He was confused. Yunlin watched and gloated. Because he knew perfectly well that the opponent would not be able to do anything, he told Xiaofen not to even try to resist. This is the 9 dragons sealing the heavens, a secret technique. Even the master of the realm of consciousness was crushed by this force. Xiaofen tried to fight this tower and the dragons, but nothing came out. Doesn't he have any way to win? Xiaofen remembered the beautiful image of his girlfriend. He remembered meeting Zhu, remembered the beginning of their relationship, remembered how Zhu had asked him to be careful, remembered the old monk under the tree. He thought he didn't want to die. He really wanted to live. Maybe it was a miracle, and maybe it wasn't. Xiaofen was able to close the tower. Yunlin stood there and couldn't believe his eyes. He had never met a person capable of handling a tower before. Xiaofen thought he wasn't ready to die over such a piece of junk. He breathed a sigh of relief. Zhu looked at him with tenderness and rejoiced at his victory. Xiaofen walked up to the man who had almost killed him just now and grabbed him by the collar. He shouted that Xiaofen wouldn't dare to hit him, but that's exactly what Xiaofen did. He punched his enemy in the face and he fell to his knees. Someone immediately rushed to Yunlin's aid. someone shouted to Zi Often that he was a corpse and Master Zhu Sidao would not let him go just like that. At that moment, someone took Yunlin's hand. It was the same Zhu Sidao, the main disciple. All the people around were shocked. They did not expect that the main disciple would arrive. He said he really wanted to see the one who dared to injure his brother like that. His appearance was very formidable. Zi Often looked at him and thought that Zhu Sidao had a very powerful aura. They looked each other straight in the eye. Unexpectedly, Sidao decided to strike first. He captured Zi Often in chains and he couldn't even move. Zi Often didn't like it very much. He tried to break out of these shackles, but everything was unsuccessful. Suddenly, someone broke the chain. Sidao looked around. It was EQ. She congratulated Brother Zhu on successfully achieving soul incarnation. He is the first of the new generation of the Heavenly Emperor clan to do so. The girl said that if someone who has a status like Zhu Sidao's brother fights with newcomers, he will lose his reputation. Why not stop there? Zhu Sidao listened to the girl's words and told his brother that it was time for them to leave. Zi Often looked at the girl and thought that she was just a goddess who descended from heaven to earth. Zhu was very indignant at the sight of her boyfriend's behavior. Zi Often looked at this lovely goddess and thanked her for saving him from a painful death. Zhu rushed to the girl and shouted that she missed her little sister very much. Zi Often was shocked by the information he heard. Are they really sisters? The girls started exchanging pleasantries among themselves without noticing Zi Often. The sister was a little unhappy that Zhu had been in Huang Tianmen for 2 months in secret from her, and now she is telling her how much she missed her. Zhu justified herself by saying that she just wanted to surprise her beloved sister. Zi Often walked up to Yiqiu and handed her an immortal spiritual root. She looked at Zi Often and said that it was too valuable a gift and she couldn't accept it. But Zi Often replied that she saved his life, and this is just a small thank you, so she simply has to accept this root. Zhu also told her sister to take the root. Then Yiqiu had no choice but to accept the gift. The girl was about to leave, but stopped and turned to Zi Often and Zhu, who were standing right behind her, asked her sister if she wanted to come back with her. Zhu thought for a second, and then said that it was better to stay, because otherwise Zi Often would be left alone. Zi Often looked at his girlfriend with tenderness in his eyes. Zhu waved to her sister, who was walking away into the distance, and she waved back. Zi Often thought that he was very happy in this world, because he had a person who was worried that he might be left alone. Zi Often said that Zhu was very kind to him and offered to repay her for her kindness with his body, but Zhu said that no one needed it and turned away from him and went on. Zi Often and Zhu came to the house. They were discussing what happened today and did not even suspect that at this time someone outside was listening to everything they were talking about. Zi Often looked at Zhu with a smile and said that he was thinking about when he would finally be able to marry Zhu. The girl replied that no one had said that she wanted to marry him. The guy just laughed in response to her words. Suddenly Zi Often made a very serious face. Zhu thought that she had never seen him so serious before. He asked the girl to tell him something about the world where they live. Zhu didn't understand the question a bit. It seemed strange to her. But still, she began to tell Zi Often everything she knew about their world. She told me that this world is known as Tzai. On Earth, many astronomers assumed that this small purple star, which is far from Earth, is another source of life in the universe. But with existing technologies, this theory can be limited to assumptions, and the people of Earth will never know that there really is life here. Zi Often thought about that he really had passed through time and space and so ended up in this strange, previously unfamiliar world. Zhu called out to the guy, asking why he was in the clouds again. Zi Often asked the girl how the powers in this world are divided. Zhu said that currently there are 4 main forces: Kiwei Jiao, Huang Tianmen, the Xiang clan, and Binggong. But in fact, there are still a few hidden clans that have existed for many generations since time immemorial. They are even scarier and much stronger than the 4 clans they know. Zi Often was very impressed by the girl's story, and he wanted to find out from her what kind of clans they are with great power. But the girl replied that since the clans are hidden, then naturally ordinary people do not know anything about them. She suggested that he analyze the situation by example. She began to tell that Huang Tianmen is a place that was originally the remains of a primeval sacred Taoist sect. After the clan disappeared, the peerless hero took over this land and founded the Heavenly Emperor clan, which is flourishing to this day. The secrets of the Dao clan are hidden in it, and for many years there have been many people, world masters and even cultivators who have surpassed the mysterious immortal realm, trying to find the key to solving this riddle, but none of them has been able to find it. Zi Often looked at the girl with tenderness in his eyes and thought that this girl is just wonderful. He asked how she knew all this, and she replied that her grandfather had told her all this. Zi Often thought that Grandpa Zhu must have been a top master, otherwise how would he know so many secrets? Zhu turned around and looked at the guy and said that if you think about it, there are only 5 days left. She told him to eat the spiritual root, and she would help him train by channeling Kai energy. She also winked and added that she would tell Zi Often something else later. Zi Often was scared by Zhu's words and asked if there was a risk in this, but she hurried to calm him down, telling him to relax, because the worst is the worst. What can happen is a body explosion. Zai often felt even worse. How can you relax after hearing about the explosion of the body? Zhu said that if Zai often didn't eat the spiritual root, then she wouldn't be his girlfriend anymore. Zai often looked at the girl pleadingly with tears in his eyes and assured her that he would eat the root. So he did. Before training, he ate a spiritual root. Zai often and Zhu were sitting on the bed, and she was telling him to control his sea of consciousness and let his spiritual consciousness enter his body. She sat behind him and directed the flow of energy directly into his back. Any creature born in this world contains more or less impurities in its body. By cleansing their bodies from bones to bone marrow, the practitioner discovers their hidden inner powers, thereby providing an advantage for yourself for your future cultivation. Zhu said that this is the first time she helps someone clean their bones. She didn't expect everything to go so smoothly. The girl smiled. But it seems that everything did not go as smoothly as the girl thought. She noticed that there was too much spiritual Kai in Zai often's body and could not understand why. Zai often couldn't wake up from his trance. He also didn't know what was going on and why he couldn't wake up. He felt that his body was about to explode. He thought he didn't want to die. He remembered about the copper shard that once saved his life and turned to him and said that he had already helped him once. And wouldn't he be able to save his life again now? Zai often was covered in sweat. He tried to wake up, but he couldn't. Using the spirit for the development of the body, divinity for the education of the body, and willpower for the hardening of the body, you can break the boundaries of everything that exists in nature. The copper fragment still helped its owner and saved his life again. At this time, the person who was still eavesdropping outside saw a ray of bright light from Zai often's house. He was standing with an expression of surprise on his face. Zai often performed a mystical technique to train the body. Those who cultivated this technique at an early stage have a strong physique, like a diamond, possessing incredible strength. The body cannot be damaged by ordinary weapons. Once a cultivator reaches the final stage and breaks the boundaries of everything that exists in nature, he or she will possess an indestructible diamond body. Zai often broke a hole in the roof of the house and took off. He was in the air, illuminated by a bright yellow light, and the person who had been listening all this time stood and did not understand what kind of nightmare was happening. Zhu was also in shock, because the guy was sitting next to her just recently, and now he is in the air. Besides, he also broke a hole in the roof. She shouted at him to stop, otherwise he might alarm all the elders of the Heavenly Emperor clan. Zai often replied that he himself would like to stop all this as soon as possible, but he could not stop it in any way. He turned to the copper shard again and asked him to help him hide his Kai, otherwise someone might discover him. He helped him and Zai often flew to the ground with loud cries. He fell down and Yu and Zhu immediately ran up to him, asking if he was all right and what had just happened. She saw that he was lying on the ground and began to sob, begging him not to die and saying that she would be his girlfriend. Zai often immediately woke up and said that he would not die, and Zai Zhu should not forget about his words. Yu and Zhu was startled when Zai often abruptly sat down. She screamed angrily that most of all she hates people who deceive her. Jiang Zai often sat under a tree and meditated, thinking that he was not only able to restore his strength, but he also rose to a new level, the 7th stage of the small sphere. With the help of the copper shard, Zai often can now hide the level of his strength, so he changed his 7th step to the 5th. He realized that he could control the copper fragment. Suddenly Zai Zhu came up to him from behind. He noticed her and said that he already knows that he is very handsome, and she does not need to constantly monitor him. Sooner or later he would like to become her man. Zhu objected, saying that no one was watching him, and then asked how he could change his steps. Zai often replied that he would only tell her if she married him. and Zhu was very angry with him. Then he asked if Zhu had wanted to tell him something earlier. Zai Zhu said that the immortal old man told her that they live in a special time. Jiang Zai often was surprised. What else is a special time? Zhu continued, saying that it is someone from this era who comprehends the Tao and reaches heaven, as predicted in the legends. Zai often was surprised to hear such words. By practicing, constantly exploring the essence of the Tao, going beyond the mundane, dominating the 5 elements, and even more, one can reach heaven. Jiang Zai often asked Yu and Zhu how strong the old man she was talking about was. She replied that she didn't know because she had never seen him, but he was definitely stronger than Zai often. Then Zai often decided that he would practice the Tao and he would be the one who could reach heaven. Jiang Zai often turned around and looked at the girl who was standing behind him near the tree. He said that he would follow the right path, because he wanted to protect Yu and Zhu. She looked at him with both tenderness and surprise. Then she turned around and said that she didn't need to be protected at all, she was very strong herself. Zai often only laughed at her, saying that she was very strong. She asked him not to laugh, and he replied that he would listen to his mistress. 3 days have passed. All the students gathered for distribution to the 7 main peaks. Zai often was constantly thinking about what these 7 main peaks were, and which peak they would be assigned to. Zhu said that there are 7 main peaks: Tanhang Peak, Chandu Peak, Tanyam Peak, Tanong Peak, Tangsing Peak, and Chanu Peak, where her sister Yaku is located. The elder began his speech, looking at the students. You will all be assigned to the main peaks today. Do not forget to teach others in the future and concentrate on practice. All the disciples shouted to the elders at once that they would meet their expectations. Distribution has begun. Shen Yifeng was sent to Chang'an Peak and given 1 Yunong pill. Lei Hu will go to Tanyang Peak and he got 1 pill Lo. Yiyuan Zhu got Tanu Peak and was given 1 Ice Spirit pill. Zai often was a little upset, because now all that's left is Tanheng Peak, and Zhu Sidao is there, so Zai often can't possibly be there. Zai often was sent to Wuwei Peak and given 1 Soul Growth pill. Zai often was surprised, because he had never heard of such a thing before. All the students went to their peaks. Zhang Zai often was escorted to the place by a man and, saying that they were on the spot, informed Zai often to continue climbing himself. Zai often thought, is this the peak of Wuwei? Can this even be considered a major peak? Without even calling it a mountain, he gave a big salute. Zai often suddenly felt that someone was watching him and was about to attack. He thought it might be some kind of trap. Zai often quickly caught the attackers and asked why they decided to sneak attack him. They clung to his legs and talked about what they had heard about his achievements and that he deserved his name. They were 2 completely inexperienced third-degree disciples of the small kingdom. One was called Lin Quan, and the other was called Tang Yu. Zai often heard footsteps behind him. It was old man Liu Chenin. He was just looking for Zai often. He approached the young man and said that this place could not be compared to the 7 main peaks. There aren't many good resources here. Therefore, the old man asked him to take the pill as a gift. He handed Zai often a pill and Zhang Zai often kindly accepted the gift from the old man's hands, thanking him. Then the old man said he would take a break and everyone could just enjoy their time. Zai often told him to be careful and the old man left. Zai often was sitting with new acquaintances by the campfire and eating cooked food. One of them said that Zhang Zai often couldn't even imagine how famous he was and asked for another rabbit leg. But the other guy wouldn't let him eat the leg, saying it was for Senior Liu. Zai often at this moment thought that these guys were very kind to him. He was grateful to them for that. Lin Quan said that when Zai often arrived at the clan, he beat Zhu Sidao's cousin and ended up beating his younger brother. Both guys looked at Zai often with delight in their eyes. Tang Yu said that Zhu Sidao is the chief disciple of the clan and has a mysterious past. Even many elders treat him with respect. But Zai often managed to offend him. Zhang Zai often immediately realized that it was probably Sidao who had done something to be sent to this particular place. He would not have gotten here just like that. Zhang Zai often got tired of talking about this and asked Lin Quan and Tang Yu why they were here and who was this old man anyway. Tang Yu began to tell how they were originally students of the Alchemist Pavilion. But unfortunately, they destroyed the pill bottle and were sent here as punishment. As for the elder, he was practically put under arrest here. Zai often wondered what kind of arrest this was. Zai often learned from them that the old man's name was Liu Chenin, and he was an elder of the Heavenly Emperor clan, but because of the deviation, his cultivation was forever lost, and he was sent here even though Senior Liu did nothing. He has lost his cultivation, but his sea of consciousness still exists. And if anyone discovers him, he will be able to extract many of the clan's secrets from old man Liu's sea of consciousness. Zhang Zai often understood everything now. Tang Yu sadly said that old man Liu's body is very weak. The clan will not provide for mortal needs such as food. Instead, they give pills as the body's livelihood. They are given only 2 pills every day. Even the disciples find it difficult to quench their thirst and hunger, not to mention Senior Liu, whose cultivation is damaged. They gave some of their pills to him. However, he keeps them, but never uses them. Every couple of nights, he secretly feeds the students these pills. He thinks they don't know about it. Zai often thought. He sat and stared at one point. He realized that Senior Liu had just given him his pill. He thought that old man Liu had devoted most of his life to this clan. But in the end, apparently, this was his fate. These so-called Taoist sects are even more violent than the sects of mortals. Zai often got up from his seat and shouted loudly that everyone who does this is just disgusting creatures and they are not people at all. Zhang Zai often was so angry that he clenched his hands into fists, and his face was burning with anger. Suddenly old man Liu appeared and asked who was making noise here. Old man Liu walked up to the students, and they immediately stood up. He looked at them and asked what it smelled like. Were they fooling around by chance? One of the students said that Master Liu was just in time and offered him a taste of the rabbit meat prepared by Zai often. Zhang Zai often handed the old man a piece of meat and offered to try it, saying that if the old man liked it, he would catch a bunch of rabbits and cook them for Master Liu at least every day. The old man tried it. The crust on the outside was crispy, the flesh inside was tender and soft, and the aroma was simply excellent. Old man Liu really liked the rabbit meat. Suddenly someone knocked a piece of meat out of the old man's hands with a stone and indignantly said that this was the great clan of the Heavenly Emperor, and they decided to fry meat here. What is this behavior? Zai often looked questioningly at the uninvited guest who had arrived. It was Wang Chong, a disciple of the 7th stage of Tanyang Peak. He demanded that they all get out of here immediately. The students did not understand why he was so indignant, because they just decided to fry some meat and did nothing wrong. Zai often was furious at Wang Chong's behavior. Wang Chong shouted at one of the students, saying that he did not dare to contradict him, because they were just pathetic students and there was no one among them who had a level higher than the 5th. Senior Liu immediately intervened. He came forward and said that these guys only wanted to feed the weakened old man so that he would regain his strength. He promised that it would not affect the process of learning martial arts in any way. Wang Chong asked how old Liu stooped to satisfy his hunger with such slop. He added that it was terribly pathetic. He looked at old man Liu with disdain and mocked him. The students were furious. They didn't like being insulted by the master. Then Jiang Xiaowen asked permission to explain himself to Wang Chong. Wang Chong wanted to say something, but before he could finish, he opened his eyes and saw Jiang Xiaowen's fist approaching him. He was very surprised and did not have time to react in any way. He was thrown by the blow against a tree. He screamed in pain, and then from the fact that someone dared to hit him. He looked at Xiaowen in a rage and shouted that he was just a disciple from Wu Wei Peak, and how dare he beat him, an inner disciple. Xiaowen only laughed out loud in response and added that if some miserable trash had hit him now, then it turns out that he himself is even worse than this garbage. Wang Chong couldn't believe what Jiang Xiaowen was saying now. He was full of discontent and anger. He wanted to attack Xiaowen unexpectedly. After taking off, he took off with one sharp jump and ended up near the place where Xiaowen was standing. But when he got there, Xiaowen instantly disappeared. Wang Chong didn't understand where Jiang Xiaowen had gone. But Xiaowen was right behind him. He called out to Wang Chong, asking where he was looking. Wang Chong was very scared and turned around abruptly. But when he turned to face his opponent, a strong blow from a stone flew into his face. He flew away and sat down on his knees and grabbed his head with his hand. There was a huge stone mark on his face. He got to his feet and told Xiaowen that he would show him again, and that he remembered it. Xiaowen just laughed and in response said that the guy should slow down a little and if he needs help, he can call friends so that they practice together. Wang Chun left. Jiang Xiaowen sat under a tree as usual and thought about everything that happened to him. Suddenly he heard some noise nearby. He opened his eyes, looked around, and then got up and jumped on a tree branch and watched what was happening. He saw Tang Yu and Lin Quan being bullied by some unknown guys, and Senior Liu was standing next to them. Old man Liu told them that this was too much and they should stop such actions. In response, he heard that he was just a pathetic old man and he should shut up. He demanded that old man Liu tell the guy to show respect and get out of here. The old man didn't know what to answer. He couldn't do anything. Suddenly, the one who was talking to old Liu, Wang Chong, flew a stone into the back of his head. He didn't understand what had happened. Then he saw Xiaowen standing on the tree. Jiang Xiaowen said that apparently he was looking for him. Wang Chong, at whom he had just thrown a stone, got angry and with rage in his eyes, looking at Xiaowen a little sideways, and called him a little bastard. Xiaowen told Wang Chong that he was very obedient, since he had brought his friends to him after all. Xiaowen jumped down from the tree. There were a lot of swords and other weapons flying at Xiaowen, but it wasn't scary at all for him. In an instant, he scattered all of Wang Chong's friends in different directions. They were lying in different places. Their swords were lying nearby, and Wang Chong himself was on his knees. Xiaowen picked up one sword from the ground and said he wasn't sure if it was strong enough. He carefully examined the swords and headed towards Wang Chong. Then he just took and broke the blade of the sword in half with his fingers in front of Wang Chong. Wang Chong was afraid to even look up. He was looking at the ground and did not even move. Xiaowen approached him and said that their first meeting was not very successful and he was returning the sword to him. Xiaowen threw a sword fragment, and it stuck into the ground right in front of his opponent's face. Wang Chong was angry at Xiaowen. He thought that although his sword was not a spiritual weapon, great efforts had been made to create it. Even 9th-level masters could not handle it. But this kid. At this time, some other guy started talking rudely to Senior Liu and a stone also flew into his head. Xiaowen came up to him and said that the elders should be treated with respect and now he should kneel down and apologize to old man Liu. The guy got angry and decided to run away, shouting to his friends that it was time to get out of here. But Jiang Xiaowen stopped them. He didn't want to just let those who came and destroyed his house get away with it. At this time, a crowd of people was passing by. They noticed some kind of scuffle and decided to take a closer look. There was a girl among these people. One guy told her that the guy in black was Chen Heng from Tiandu Peak. The other guy couldn't believe his eyes. He didn't understand if Wang Chong from Tanyang Peak was there by chance. And the girl just stood there and looked at all this and asked what it was all about and who did it all at all. Tang Yu told Xiaowen that a lot of people were looking at him and this was too much. The other guy completely agreed with him. But Xiaowen definitely didn't agree with them. He thought everything was just perfect. Then he made a serious look and frowning turned around when he saw the people watching him. They were a little scared of Xiaowen's gaze. The legendary ruthless Jiang Xiaowen arrived at Wy Peak. He was sitting in an armchair. A fan was waved over him and food was served to him. He forced Wang Cheng and his friends to restore what they destroyed. He sat and gave them orders. Wang Cheng stood up and indignantly shouted that they had not violated anything and Xiaowen should stop bullying people. Xiaowen replied with a smile that if he said fix it, then they should fix it. Or they can bring more assistants from the secret kingdom who would entertain him, and if they can't, he advised them to shut up. Suddenly Xiaowen felt some powerful inner strength. He jumped off the chair and was very surprised to see Zhu running towards him. She was running and screaming. Zai often said that these brothers are helping him rebuild their home. He looked at them and asked if this was the case, and they answered positively without looking up from their work. Zai often smiled and suddenly noticed that other guys were already attached to the girl. They asked her about her name and told her that they really had a great time. Jiang Xiaowen was absolutely furious. Zhu suggested changing the subject and said that she had been given some assignment and wanted to suggest Zai Ofeng to go on a mission with her. Zai often said goodbye to Yu and Zhu. They agreed to meet tomorrow in Tanu. The girl said she would be very much waiting for him. She walked away down the stairs into the distance, and they waved to each other. Lin Quan asked if their boss was really going to go to Tanu Peak. Zai often asked incredulously if they would also like to do the task together with his beautiful Xiao Zhu. They immediately replied that they had no such thoughts and that such a thing was impossible at all. Then they informed him that, in fact, such a thing is prohibited here. But before they could blink, Zai often was already gone. They stood there and didn't understand where he could have gone. Zhang Xiaowen was hiding behind a bush near the gate, which was guarded by two young pretty girls. He walked up slowly, smiled, said hello and said he wanted to find someone. He asked if they would show him the way. But the girls didn't pay the slightest attention to him. He started running around them, looking around and asking if they could hear him. Suddenly, one of the girls put a sharp spearhead right to his neck and said that men were forbidden to be on Tanu Peak and asked how he dared to come here at all. Zai often remembered Tang Yu and Lin Quan and wondered why they hadn't told him about it. Then he decided to outwit the guards and sharply shouted that there were flying saucers behind them. The girls turned to look, and when they turned around, he was no longer visible. The guards noticed that someone had made his way to Tanu Peak and everyone was looking for an outsider. Tang Yu and Lin Quan were thinking about how beautiful their boss was. They watched the guards and left. An announcement was made that an outsider had invaded Tanu Peak today. He had to be found urgently. All the girls were told that if they stumbled upon him, they should not feel sorry for him, but should punish him properly. The girls obediently nodded. Zai often sat in the bushes and watched everything that was happening in Tanu. He thought that these ladies were clearly overdoing it. He just came to visit a friend. Besides, Zhu even told herself where she lived. Zai often pushed aside the leaf of the bush that was falling right on his face and saw a girl. He was a little scared, because it seemed to be a girl from a secret realm. Zai often decided that he needed to hide as soon as possible so that she wouldn't accidentally notice him. But when he looked at the road again, the girl was no longer there. Zai often was shocked by how skilled all the girls in Tanu were. He thought that he should quickly find Zhu and take her away. He was leaning with one hand on a stone and did not understand what kind of hellish place it was. He went to the water and decided to wash a little. He remembered meeting 3 masters of the Holy Realm and 5 masters of the Secret Realm on his way. Suddenly he saw some kind of cloth floating on the water. He didn't know what it could be. And then he took the fabric out of the water. It seemed to be a corset. Zai often looked at the water and realized that there was an enemy nearby. A girl jumped out of the water. She was standing with her back to Zai often. Then she covered herself with her hands and took the corset from Zai often's hands and thanked him. He looked straight into the girl's eyes. She was looking at him with a slightly worried look. While the girl was putting on her clothes, Jiang Xiaowen asked if she would believe him if he said that he was just passing by and decided to refresh his face with water. He was smiling, still hoping it would work. But the girl clearly revealed his deception. Zai often thought that she seemed to believe him and said that it was time for him, so he would go first. Zai often rushed to run as far away from this girl as possible. But he could not escape far, and he decided to just hide behind a rock. The girl was calling him. He was sitting behind a large stone and covering his head with his hands, calling for help from his metal fragment. The girl screamed that she just wanted to talk to him. The girl listened, but did not hear the guy's breathing. She did not understand why. But still she found him. And throwing her spear into the stone behind which he was sitting, she told him to come out immediately if he did not want his head to be cut off. She walked near the stones and demanded that he come out. But Zai often thought that if the man said he wouldn't come out, then he shouldn't come out. Suddenly, the voice of another girl was heard. She was looking for Sister Bingxing. Zai often felt relieved that he hadn't been caught. It turned out that it was the voice of Yi and Zhu. Zai often was unspeakably glad of her appearance. He jumped up with joy and began to admire Zhu. Bingxing noticed him and screamed that he was a womanizer. Zhu was confused and asked why this girl was calling him a womanizer. Zai often hid from this girl behind Xiao Zhu's back. Iquo suddenly appeared. She asked what they were doing here. They all moved to the garden table, and over a cup of tea discussed all the misunderstanding that had occurred. Hui looked at her sister and laughed and said that it was such nonsense to let the young master come to you at Tanu Peak. Xiao Zhu also laughed and apologized, saying that she had completely forgotten that men are forbidden to be in this place. Without the permission of the chief at the peak, even experienced masters from the Heavenly Emperor clan cannot come to Tanu Peak. You need to register, otherwise, the violator of this rule will be expelled. Hui added that young Master Jiang probably wasn't aware that the entrance to Tanu Peak has always been forbidden for men. This rule was invented by the first head of Tanu Peak. Zai often was indignant, thinking, how could that cruel old woman have forbidden the source of life? He was almost caught. Qiu gave Jiang Xiaowen a small jade pendant, with which he will now be able to freely enter Tianu Peak and not find himself in an awkward position again, as happened today. Xiaowen accepted this gift with great joy and thanked Sister Qiu. Zhu said that Sister Yu Pei was to blame for everything. She was the head of the first generation. Xiaowen asked who the head of the first generation was. Jiang Xiaowen then looked at his new pendant and wondered with disgust if it happened to belong to the same old woman. Xiaowen was sitting and thanking Sister Qiu for her kindness to him, and a disgruntled Bingxing was sitting next to him. Then Qiu remembered that they hadn't introduced themselves properly yet and introduced him to his new acquaintance Bingxing. Bingxing is not only a disciple of Tianu Peak, but also the heiress of the Ice Palace, the saint of the Ice Palace. She owns ice. Jiang Xiaowen was a little surprised. He thought, did he really see the heiress of the Ice Palace? Xiaowen was shocked by the news that they would have to do the task together with Bingxing. Zhu confirmed, saying that they needed to go to the Ice Palace with Bingxing to find a secret letter there and send it to the head of the clan. Xiaowen said that he suddenly felt sick, perhaps because of injuries, and apparently this time he would not be able to keep them company. Yu and Zhu asked what happened to him. Bingxing said she thought Xiaowen was just afraid of her. Xiaowen was shocked. It was a very cruel, in his opinion, reception. Do they really want him to go too? No way. After all, Xiaowen had to go with them, because he wanted to prove that he was not afraid at all. The three of them went. Qiu told him that she was counting on him very much. She waved goodbye to them as they left. Xiaowen walked and thought that he didn't hate Bingxing at all, but he doubted if she would do something bad to him. On the way they met Mohao and his gang. Mohao told Xiaowen that after a few days of absence, this guy became more energetic, and he laughed out loud. Xiaowen laughed and said that he was fine, and then asked who they were at all. He did not recognize Mohao. Jin Mohao got angry and said that he was an inner disciple of Tianhuan Peak. Xiaowen replied that he was very sorry about what happened between them. Sorry, he asked not to blame him. Although, as far as he knows, Mohao still hasn't found his tooth. Jiang Xiaowen looked at Mohao with disdain, and Mohao was getting more furious by the minute. The guy who was with Mohao said that young Jiang was very frivolous. He offended the elders, then he was sent to Wu Wei Peak, and the spiritual sword that was supposed to be given to him was given to Brother Jin. Mohao added with a grin that he was very ashamed of it. So that's how it turned out. Xiaowen thought and said that since he was ashamed, why shouldn't he pay? But he only scared the guy and did not beat him. He just walked forward, calling Sister Bingxing and Zhu to follow him. They went their own way, and Mohao shouted that Xiaowen was a bastard and advised the girls to stay away from him, because he was a villain and could tarnish their honor. Bingxing turned to Jin Mohao's gang and asked permission to say that it was better to follow young Master Jin and protect her path to cultivation. It's much better than messing with the Mohao brat. And she turned it into a block of ice with her power. Jiang Xiaowen was absolutely delighted with her actions. He said that it served them right, they deserved it. But at the same moment he thought how annoying it was that this girl was so cold and insensitive. They came to the cliff and there was no way further. Xiaowen looked down, it was quite high. He asked how they would cover this distance. Bingxing replied that the journey would take about 10 years. Xiaowen was horrified by what he heard, and Yu and Zhu just walked up and kicked the guy right off the cliff, and he fell. When he was falling, a sword flew to him and he stopped falling, but began to fly, grabbing onto this weapon. He was glad that he was flying. Once the cultivation level reaches the secret realm, a person will be able to fly through the air, relying only on their own strength and not using items such as the Dao sword and others. Xiaowen was very upset by the news that he would only be able to fly with a sword. He shouted that he would complain that he could not fly without a sword, but no one was interested in his complaints. He flew, holding the sword tightly, and saw that Bingxing had reached the heavenly kingdom and Xiaozu could also fly without a sword. He was very surprised. Did she really go up a step? He asked Xiaozu, could it be that she had gone up a step? She replied that he was right, and he was. Jiang Xiaowen thought that this meant that he was the weakest among them. Jiang Xiaowen was very tired when they first arrived at the place. For some reason his whole body hurt a lot. Xiaozu said there was a tea house nearby and they could go there to take a break. Xiaowen thought that Yu and Zhu really loved him, since he cared about him so much. They were walking forward and suddenly Xiaowen crashed into something big and hard like a rock. He raised his head, looked, it was a bald man. Xiaowen asked why the hell this man was standing in his way. The man replied so that Jiang Xiaowen would not ask stupid questions and pointed to the pointer where something was written. Xiaowen looked at the sign. There was something written about a demon. He was angered by what was written there and he started shouting at the bald man. The bald guy told him he wasn't a demon. The woman who was walking in front of Xiaowen told this man that he was the demon of her house, so the man behaved like that. Jiang Xiaowen got angry and saying that it was all complete nonsense turned around and walked away. Jiang Xiaowen was sitting at a table with his female companions and drinking tea. Xiaozu laughed at what Bingxing had done, but Xiaowen didn't find it funny at all. He was still remembering that moment. Xiaowen saw a beggar being chased away from below, saying that he stinks and that he should go begging elsewhere. The beggar asked that Grandpa Zhang be saved. but a man shouted that it was impossible to distract Mr. Zi when he was drinking tea and demanded that the beggar leave immediately, as he stinks a lot. Xiaozu and Bingxing looked at this scene with indignation. How dare these people treat beggars like this? Grandpa said he had lived long enough, so it would be better for them to just leave quietly. But Zaya didn't agree with Grandpa. The person who bought the vegetables told him that there are experts here who can cure Grandpa and they can't just walk away. The old man Shen Fengmen, who is at the 7th stage, asked why the guy does not realize that he is just a nobody. He offered the guy a deal. If he can withstand 10 of his kicks and survive, then so be it, I will help your grandfather. The old man looked at the guy and laughed. But Zaya wasn't a coward at all, and he agreed, just 10 kicks, for Grandpa's sake. He braced himself for the blows, covering his head with his hands. He was hit 10 times, beaten so hard that blood began to flow from his mouth. Old man Shen Fengmen laughed and said that today was really just a wonderful day. He heard some sounds coming from behind. Turning around, he looked at the guy and he said that they had agreed that his grandfather would be helped if he could withstand 10 blows. Old man Shen Fengmen was surprised that this guy hasn't died yet. He said he promised to save Grandpa. But I can't do it, so the promise is meaningless, and called the guy an idiot. The guy was in shock. He didn't know what to say to him and what to do with his grandfather now. He clutched the old man's leg with his hands and started shouting that since he had promised to save his grandfather, he now had to find a way to do it. The old man got angry at the guy and wanted to kick him. At this time, Xiaozu noticed that Jiang Xiaowen had disappeared somewhere. He covered the young guy with himself and told the old man with anger in his eyes that he should stop, otherwise he would kill him.